Good morning, 7th graders, and welcome to today's lesson on context clues. If you remember last week, we also talked about context clues. This week is going to be a little bit different. And our learning target today is to determine the meaning of words and phrases as they are used in text, including figurative, connotative, and technical meaning. Now, what I would like to do is take a moment and actually review what we learned last week, and then we will get to the new part today. So the review is connotative means that the author has chosen a word based off of its feeling. So when you read the word, you immediately have some sort of feeling, whether it be positive or whether it be negative. Figurative is when the author can use and combine words to express ideas or experiences in detail. And as we discussed last week, normally we would think about these as being the comparisons, using similes and metaphors, but you can also use other kinds of figurative language. And technical, remember, those are the ones that I say are very much like your textbook definitions. The ones that would might come from science or engineering or math or even social studies. So what we're going to do is we are going to talk about analyzing word meanings using context clues. Context clues are anything in the sentence that gives you a hint as to what the word means. Now, why do we use them? Because all good readers know that some words are going to be difficult to understand. Even myself, as I am reading some things, will come across a word that I have never seen, and I end up using context clues to determine the meaning. So let's see if you can tell me what these words mean. Since it was raining outside, I used my bumper chute to keep from getting wet. Now, what is something that would keep you from getting wet outside? It would be an umbrella. Unlike Kyle, who is a conformer and a follower, LeCedric is a maverick. Now, if Kyle is a conformer and a follower, meaning he does whatever the majority of the group would do, and LeCedric is a maverick, that means that LeCedric is going to be somebody who does what he wants, doesn't necessarily follow the crowd. The ravenous hawk, an animal that eats frogs, is found in Central and Eastern Africa. Now, this one in particular is easy because it actually gives us your definition there. It tells us what kind of hawk it is. It's the animal that eats frogs. And the last example here is in class, Julia was so cantankerous that her grumpy behavior negatively affected everyone. So, what does cantankerous mean? Well, here in the sentence, we have grumpy and we have negative, which means cantankerous probably means not in a good mood. So let's talk about 5 strategies that we will use to determine the meaning of context clues. Now, I will go ahead and tell you, and as you can see, yes, I've already gone back a slide here, because I would like to emphasize that I am sure your first instinct is the same instinct my kids have, which is, Miss Roberts, what does this word mean? And I don't really tell them that I use these strategies, but if they're paying attention, they will recognize these techniques that I use in class. So the first strategy is definitions, which means that the meaning of the unfamiliar word is given right in the sentence, just like the sentence about the hawk. Signal words. And let me just give a little note here on signal words. Signal words are words that are in a sentence that's kind of like that flashing light bulb that says, here you go, this is what you're looking for. So the signal words for definitions would be is, are, or, means, or refers to. So for example, unconquerable means you cannot be overcome by events or people. So we're given the definition. I know that if something is unconquerable, it means that it is not going to be taken over by someone else. The second strategy is using a synonym. Now, synonyms are something that we have been used in elementary and middle school here. It's when a similar word is given for the unfamiliar word. Signal words here include also, as, like, same, and to. So for an example, she is cautious crossing the street and also carefully riding her bike. So we have cautious And we have careful. We have synonyms in that sentence. The third strategy is antonym, which means that the word meaning the opposite of the unfamiliar word is also given. Signal words might include but, unlike, though, however, and instead of. So the example says, the dog was a menace to the delivery guy, but he was sweet to me. And that is the indication right there that there is something different coming. The fourth strategy is an example. Samples, instances, or ideas of the unfamiliar word are given. Signal words might include, for example, like, such as, and including. Now this is probably the one that I give the most of to my students because it's easier for us to make a connection if you haven't that example given. One example here is circumstances, such as leaving late, catching red lights, and reading the directions wrong meant I was late to the party. So here I have circumstances, and then I have such as. That is my brain's way of knowing I've got examples coming up. And the fifth strategy is general. This is when general clues are given about an unfamiliar word. Now, unfortunately, there aren't any signal words to be used for this, so I'm going to give you some strategies in order to tackle those words. The example, it says, I appreciate the way the crowd encouraged me. I won first place. Now, there's nothing in this example that gives us something to tell us what encouraged means. And I know encourage is probably a word that we all know, but if you look at the example, it talks about appreciating, or it talks about the way that the person won first place. They're obviously not going to be winning first place if they're in a stadium full of people booing them. So encourage, we can think of as that is, clapping, cheering. Now, here is your way of dealing with the general strategy, okay? First, you need to think about the 5 types of clues. Definitions, synonyms, antonyms, examples, and even general, okay? Then you look for words, phrases, and signal words that may help to figure out the meaning of the unfamiliar word. And I will tell you that sometimes, even within one paragraph, you may have 2 or 3 of these in there. It isn't just one or another. 3, if necessary, reread or read ahead to find other clues about the word. Now, I am sure that many of you might pull the same tactics that my kids do, and you read one sentence, and then you look at me and say, I don't understand what this means. This is when you have to reread or read ahead. And typically the author is not going to put that definition 4 or 5 pages ahead. It's probably 1 or 2 paragraphs away. 4, use the clues to help figure out the meaning of the word. You might not have a clear-cut definition of it, and it's okay. As long as you have a general idea of what the word means and how it's used in that sentence or that paragraph, you're okay. 5, try to learn meaning in the sentence. If you think you have that definition, go ahead and apply maybe a synonym in that sentence, or try putting that definition in there, the one you've come up with, and see if it makes sense. If it does, continue reading. If it doesn't, then I highly suggest that you go get a dictionary, or at that time, yes, you may ask your teacher to help you out. Now, we've discussed our strategies, and it's time for us to put this into practice. Here's what you need to understand. I'm going to give you a variety of practice here. Some are going to be your basic sentence where we have to figure out the meaning of the word, and some of them are going to be reading passages. So, first up, what does the underlined word mean based on context clues? First, we have the lost campers sweltered in the heat of the desert sun. Now, you might not be familiar with what sweltered means, but I can assure you, living here in Mobile, Alabama in July and August, you know what sweltered means. It's when you walk outside and all of a sudden, you're begging for that AC. I mean, you leave the store and you're running to get in the car as fast as you possibly can because you are sweltering. Now see, I just gave you an example there, but if we look in the sentence, it also talks about the heat, talks about the desert sun, which means we're thinking hot. So sweltered here is probably going to mean they're burning up. Next, the scared rock climber balanced precariously on the edge of the cliff. Now, precarious, what does that word mean? Here we have balanced, and then we've got precariously on the edge of a cliff. Now, I don't know about you, but I like to tell my kids all the time, when they're writing, do not leave me on a cliffhanger. So my kids should take what I've said in class and apply it here to understand that the precarious probably means by hanging on your fingertips. The last one on this slide says, we often traveled to New England in the autumn to see the bright colors of the fall foliage. Now, what does that mean? So if we're thinking about this, we have New England. If you've ever seen pictures, this is when you're going to pull in another type of connection. We have autumn, and then we have bright colors. Okay, so now let's think about this for a moment. In the spring, we have flowers blooming. In the summer, we get to see that. What happens in the fall season before we get to winter? The leaves start to change. So we would understand that foliage here has to do with the leaves. Let's do a few more. Each student was allotted 2 tickets to the dance. What does allotted mean? Well, we know that the students got tickets. We know that they were invited to a dance. So what do you think that means? Probably means given. And we could even say that each student was given 2 tickets to the dance. So I'm applying what I think it means in the sentence. Next, the country cottage was just outside the quaint and picturesque town. Now, picturesque might not be something that you are familiar with, but if you think about it and you look at the word itself, it has picture. So when I think of that, I think what might go up on my wall, a picture that I think is pretty, right? And it does say quaint. So I'm going to think that a picturesque town is something, a place where I would want to visit. And the last one here, it says, when he didn't understand the instructions, the student asked the teacher to clarify them. So the key here is when didn't understand. And then it goes down and it says to clarify them. So what does that mean? Probably means that that student is asking questions. So if you look at this sentence, it says when he didn't understand the instructions, the student asked the teacher to explain them. All right, so I've applied my definition here in the sentence and it makes sense. So I'm probably on the right track. Now remember, if you ever come across a word and you're not really sure, yes, using a dictionary is great, but there are times that you can't use a dictionary. For example, on state testing, you might not know the meaning of a word, or in fact, one of the questions might be, what is the meaning of this? You can't ask the proctor in the room because they're just going to shake their head and walk off. So you need to be familiar with using context clues because it is a life skill that will help you no matter what you go into. Now, we are going to move into something a little bit harder because, and my students would tell you that I do this all the time. I ease them into something, I make them think it's going to be easy. But the skills that we just learned will and can help you when you come across passages. So I'm going to read a very short paragraph from a short story titled After 20 Years by O. Henry. If you will follow along as I read. Trying doors as he went, twirling his club with many intricate and artful movements, turning now and then to cast his watchful eye adown the Pacific thoroughfare, the officer, with his stalwart form and slight swagger, made a fine picture of a guardian of the peace. The vicinity was one that kept early hours. Now and then you might see the lights of a cigar store or of an all-night lunch counter, but the majority of the doors belonged to business places that had long since been closed. Now, as we were reading that, you might have come across one word that you might not know, and it does have to do with stalwart. So, if we look at the question, it says, what word Stalwart most closely means as it is used in paragraph 2. So let's think about this, because you need to use process of elimination when you're looking at questions like this. So for example, let's start here with D, awkward and rigid. Does it say anything that this police officer was tripping over something, that he wasn't pleasant to be around? The answer is no, then we can eliminate that. If we look at C, threatening and scary, does he come across some situation that puts him in danger? Is he threatening somebody? The answer is no, we can eliminate that. If we look at B, it says rude and arrogant. Does it say anything in here about him being rude? Does it give some sort of situation where he interacted with a character? No, it doesn't. But we can't eliminate everything, right? So let's look at A, loyal and dedicated. These are the two that I had left as I was working my way through. Now, rude and arrogant doesn't really work in here, except for the fact it does say slight swagger. So maybe arrogant would be there, but then I have to look, and it talks about his watchful eye, and it talks about made a fine picture of a guardian of the peace. So by process of elimination, we are left with A, loyal and dedicated. So we used our context clues to not only eliminate answer choices, but to come up with our correct answer. Let's look at this one. Sometimes a Dream Needs a Push by Walter Dean Myers. This is a short story from him. When I told Mom, she was all for it, but Dad just looked at me and mumbled something under his breath. He does that sometimes. Mom said that he's chewing up his words to see how they taste before he lets them out. So the question that you might be given by your teacher might look like this. What does Chris mean when she tells Chris that his dad is chewing up his words to see how they taste before he lets them out? Now, if you remember last week's lesson, you would be able to tell me that this has to do with figurative meaning. So it means we're going to have to look for some sort of comparison or some type of figurative language. So once again, let's use process of elimination. D, that Chris's dad doesn't like what he's about to say. Well, that could be true because it does talk about mumbling under his breath. C, that Chris's dad is deciding what to say. Okay, that Chris's dad is trying not to be mean. Well, and we all know that when we don't like a situation, we tend to mumble under our breath, right? Hoping that the person doesn't hear what we're saying, but in a way, kind of hoping that they hear what they're saying. And that Chris's dad wants to make sure that he is clear. Now, this one is a little bit harder to eliminate, but if we go back, there is one clear-cut answer, and that would be that Chris's dad is deciding what to say. We're looking at it. He's chewing on his words to see how they taste before he lets them out. In other words, he's trying to determine, is this what he's really trying to say? And our last example is a poem entitled Truth by Nikki Grimes. If you will read along. The truth is, every day we rise is like thunder. A clap of surprise could be echoes of trouble or blossoms of blessing. You never know what garish or gorgeously disguised memories to be might rain down from above. So look up. Claim that cloud with a silver lining. Our job, if you ask me, is to follow it. See where it leads. So the question here, it says, how does the author's word choice contribute to the tone of the poem? So now we have to go back and we have to look at our words over here. All right? So answer choices say, it conveys how it is better to approach the future with humor. Are there any words in our poem that talks about something being funny? Not really, so we can eliminate that one. B, it stresses that the future is not always predictable. Well, that's also true. We live in the South. We get rain at any given moment, right? And it does. It talks about the thunder, talks about troubles or blossoms of blessing. We never know what's going to happen with our weather. C, it portrays a sense of anxiety about the future. Okay, sometimes it can cause us anxiety. Or D, it emphasizes how ominous the unknown is. So, which one did you pick? Because if you go back and you look, it talks about thunder, yes, a clap of surprise. All right, it talks about troubles, or it mentions blossoms of blessing, talks about the garish or the gorgeously disguised, talks about how it might rain down from above, but then look how she ends it. So look up, claim that cloud with the silver lining. That means we're always looking for what might be best for us. And then she ends it and says to follow it or see where it heads. So what answer choice did you pick? Hopefully you picked B. It stresses that the future is not always predictable, which is true, but we should always want to follow that. Now, that wraps up our lesson on context clues. Your assignment for this week is to make sure that you check those assignments by your teachers and follow those directions, because don't forget you get a grade per week. And I would like to leave you with a challenge. Maybe make a list of new words that you've come across as you're reading, or maybe even read a poem like Jabberwocky by Lewis Carroll, because there's a lot of words in there that you might not be familiar with, but using context clues, you can determine the meaning. And I will see you next week, and I hope that y'all have a great week.